welcome to Highly Informed. I'm your host, Sean Salvaje. Highly Informed is all about entheogenic education and news you can use when it comes to the world of cannabis and psychedelics. Today I have with me Christine De la Rosa. I am so excited to have her here. Christine is a native Tejana who's making waves in cannabis, not just in a state as difficult as California. We know all the problems they have in California, but also nationwide. Her impact reverberates throughout the community as Christine works through the People's Ecosystem, the People's Dispensary, and now the People's DAO to empower the community and bring disenfranchised Black and brown members working in cannabis, operators working in cannabis, operators working from the legacy side of things to the forefront to reclaim power and generational wealth. Christine, that's a lot. That's a lot that you're doing. How do you do it?
Carefully. Carefully, yes.
Carefully, I like that.
Yeah.
You know what? There's an element of that when we think about carefully and we think about with care. I think there's an element of that we've been missing in cannabis for a little bit. What do you think?
Well, you know, it's not missed in the legacy market. The legacy market is definitely still about compassionate care. It's absolutely being missed in the legal market or the regulated market because the care is not authentic.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, because you know, Christine is like, you're a shark. I'm talking about like business-wise, you know, female to female. Woman to woman, that's the military in me coming out. Female to female, let's talk. You know, but really business-wise, strategy-wise, what you've achieved in such a short amount of time is insanely remarkable for startups to achieve this kind of success and this kind of resonance with the people, especially in the world of cannabis, that you have to placate to this idea of what the culture is. And you're not placating, you are the culture. You are part of the community and you bring in and you call in other people who are part of the culture, and we start to recognize that cannabis culture is not a monolith.
No.
So what has that experience of bringing people together been like for you, and what drives you to do that? I
mean, I think what drives me is that, you know, I grew up in a family very much about Cultura. My mother has a arts cultural center that's 40 years old, and it's called Para la Cultura, and that's what we're always trying to do. And there's this idea that there's a monolith, and the monolith seems in the regulated market to be for Apple stores and all white things. I mean, like all white, you know, frames, very natural, holistic. And I love that. That's beautiful for some people in the segment, right? But then there's an entire other culture. And one of the things that I really love about LA is that, and I'm gonna say this very plainly, what I love about LA in the legacy market is that when you go into the dispensaries in the legacy market, they're colorful. They have not Tejana, Mexican music playing, but you walk in, and if you're Latina or Latino, you walk in, you're like, oh, I'm okay, I'm here. I'm family, right? And you see that in different cultures. You see it in the African American culture. You have dispensaries that are very much catered to that. Feels very comfortable. And what I see happening sort of on the, you know, writ large of all the big MSOs is that they keep trying to push us into succulents and, you know, wood and looking like an Apple store. And you know what? That doesn't speak to me. Now, it speaks to some people, but it doesn't speak to me. And that's when I understood you have to have everybody in the industry. It cannot just be one group of people dictating how cannabis is dispensed, how cannabis is used. And my issue as a Latina woman is different than a issue maybe than a Black woman, is different than a Filipino woman. So there's like all of these things, and there's so much room for all of that, but they're really trying to steal it.
That's the thing, there's room for all of this at the table. When we talked with your partner, Frederica, we discussed this idea of collective empowerment.
That's right.
And it's remarkable to really think about how that can flip capitalism on its head. You have launched the People's DAO recently, and it's pretty revolutionary when we're talking about collective empowerment in a way that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about right now. And with, look at the global landscape.
Yeah.
It's about much more than just cannabis.
Right.
We see we have the situation in the Ukraine happening, and it's affecting everyone around the world. We are truly a globalized society. Mm-hmm. What do you see? Let me just give you the floor for a second to break down the inspiration behind the People's DAO. And what that actually means and how it empowers different communities.
So actually, the idea for the People's DAO started in 2016, before we knew anything about cryptocurrency, or at least that I did, right? And when we decided to transition out of the legacy market into the legal market, we realized that we didn't have safe banking. There was no place we could bank. Now, when you're in the legacy market, you understand that. You're burying shit under your backyard, right?
Yep.
You're very clear about
There's
that.
no safe banking.
But when you're in the legal market, you expect to have a place to put the money that you're collecting,
especially considering the gross amount of taxes that cannabis is paying. We're helping education, we're helping infrastructure. Mm-hmm. California is making a lot of money.
Yeah, but we can't bank. So I started in 2018. I flew to Montreal. I met with a group of developers. They were trying to sell me on this idea of a coin, of doing an ICO, and I'm a tech person. I'm a database architect, senior database architect. So when tech people are talking to me, they don't realize that because I'm a woman.
You already know what they're talking about, and they're talking to you like you don't know what's up.
Right. Oh. But I was like, yeah, this sounds like bullshit. And so I was like, I'm not going to do that. And sure enough, 18 months later, the SCA is like, hey, this is bullshit. You can't do this anymore. So I was like, phew. But I still kept my eye on what's going on because there was no place to bank. And I was thinking, if there was a way in which we could, pay with cryptocurrency, and now that's everywhere. You can pay with Bitcoin, you can pay with everything. But as we started to go down this path, as a person, I believe that our company is very successful. But as a Latina woman, I have a hard time raising capital.
Me too.
I have an exponentially harder way to raise capital.
I feel like people forget this. We talk about women's history, and we talk about the pay rate, and we talk about how women are making only so much. I think women make how much, 71
cents.
But one of those numbers that we don't talk about is Latin women make the very least.
We make
least 56.
That's right.
Half. And then part of the culture is taking care of people.
Yeah.
It becomes really hard to take care of people when you're consistently robbed of resources.
That's right.
Even if you deserve, you've earned your way, I think that's one of the myths of meritocracy based on the system that we've built, because our foundation is a little bit off, y'all. It's building on a system of enslavement is not I look at it really not just from the lens of it's an atrocity because of the social issue, and it's absolutely appalling in that way, but also if we're really going to talk numbers and talk the language of the people who like to sell us bullshit, it's really not the best foundation for capitalism either. Mm-mm. It's actually costing us so much more than it should, and it only benefits a very small elite amount of people, which to me reminds me too much of aristocracies and monarchies. And I'm like, hey y'all, can we reflect right now? Our system of capitalism is still built on the principles of a monarchy and an aristocracy. These aren't systems for the people. This is what's so interesting about what you're doing. So can you break it down? How does it bring the power back to the people?
Right. So if you look at the ecosystem, then we went and got a fund. So we have the People's Fund to be able to invest in BIPOC and women-led companies. In the course of the last 6 months since we launched the fund, I've spoken to 120 Black and brown indigenous founders, women founders, personally. And I was like, and not everything fits my investment thesis, but they're great companies. They don't need a lot of money. They might need 250, 500, 750, $1 million, which I know seems like a lot of money, but in a world where we're seeing, the large MSOs getting 30, 40, 50 million.
Pfizer just buying into cannabis, all cash while we have no safe banking.
Right.
With $6.7 billion, how am I supposed to compete with that at 56 cents to the dollar?
Right.
Come on.
And so as I was looking, I was like, there's got to be a way in which we can get investment to these smaller companies who may become huge, large companies, but really just need this amount of money and don't fit the investment thesis of the fund. And so I was talking to some of my mentors. My mentors come from a company called Full Spectrum Labs, which is also a fund. They do a lot of indigenous investment, like in Brazil or Uruguay, and they are my advisors. So I was talking to one of the advisors named Taj, and I was like, it hurts my heart because I'm looking at these people that look just like me in some cases, these female founders. And I remember looking like them, being excited. I'm talking to somebody who give me money. This is very exciting. I said, and I know that I cannot because the fund investment is different. I said, but I know that if they could reach out to their communities, they could raise that money because their communities want them to succeed. But the way financial institutions are set up is to make sure if you're a small business, even if you have the SBA loans, it's really hard for you to be successful. But in cannabis, you don't even have access to those loans. And so I started to really look into it, and he's like, well, have you ever thought of a DAO? And I had never heard of it. And I was like...
They don't teach you this stuff.
No. And I was like, what is it?
There's a reason.
Yeah. He's like, this is really new in crypto. So the minute he said the word, I'm like a sponge. And so I just went and I did I spent 48 hours, I didn't sleep. I did old tech school days, right? I had my, my music running, and I was just reading and reading. I was like, this is the thing. Because back in the day, when we raised our first $1 million, we raised it using the Jobs Act, which allowed for 35 non-accredited investors per year, per company.
And that's a big word, non-accredited.
Yes.
That's the word.
That's the word.
Because non-accredited is the thing, so people are like, well, why don't you do, I've heard this before from people when I worked in fintech, people with money. Yeah. They're like, well, why don't you do this collective thing where you all invest in a resource? I'm like, well, you have to be accredited.
That's right.
And there's a really high benchmark for accreditation, to be accredited. So people of color are almost never going to qualify for that just because of historically what's been stacked against us.
Right.
And this is the thing that kills me sometimes when we talk about social equity. Sometimes social equity is discussed in a way where they're like, well, these legacy folks just need the business acumen to succeed.
They've been succeeding for years.
We built
They've been
this
succeeding
industry.
for decades.
Exactly.
And they've been doing it without a ledger.
And
they've been doing it in their brain. You can't keep records when you're selling weed on the streets. You cannot keep records, anything written.
There's a whole nother way of thinking of entrepreneurship and business that I feel is relatable, almost to the same way where you look at leadership and structure and organization in the military, that I think both of these communities are really dismissed as not being enough. And I really love this idea of the People's DAO, bringing together the world of academics and corporate, and also all of the other ways of having intelligence in this space, because it's not just one form of intelligence that's going to get us over this hurdle.
That's right. I think one of the things that's really interesting about what we're doing is that we've already done it, but we did it in the real world where we had everything stacked against us, the banks, the SEC, and everything. This is where Web3 and cryptocurrency and the DAOs really just feel exciting, because all of the things that banks do, right, the ledgers that they write to make sure that if I give you $5, you get it, there's a ledger where it gets written, and they control that. In the blockchain controls that. And it's decentralized, so it's not one bank talking to one other bank. It's a whole...
built on a legacy of policy that is systemically flawed.
Yeah. And so this is what's so exciting, because you're like, well, I am this founder in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I have a license. I have an actual license, which is happening right now, right? There's 1,000 licenses in Los Angeles. There's 500 licenses in Illinois. There's licenses for social equity, people who are black and brown everywhere. And it's like handing somebody a golden ticket and saying, but you can't use it. Because you can have a license, but if you can't get the license, the money to actually realize the profitability of the license, you basically just have a piece of paper, right? And then what happens is that you've taken all of this time, all of this energy, you've double mortgaged your home, you've borrowed from family, you have a loan, and nobody will give you capital to actually create the thing now that you have the license.
Absolutely.
What if you could go to the community and say, I have a license, and here's my plan. I'm going to open up in this barrio, I'm going to call it this, and I want all of the people that surround me, because that's who makes money for us. In dispensaries, it's your community, because it's the people that surround your store come and give you their money to get their cannabis. So imagine if you could do that. You could go to a DAO, and the DAO says, okay, you have a license, that's worth something, and you need $750,000 to build out your location and to get it outfitted and to get your first round of employees in. the DAO will decide, we're like, okay, we're going to invest in this founder with our money so that they can realize the profitability, which at this point in where we are in the cannabis industry is only realized if you're taking out basically a payday loan from somebody.
Debt financing.
Debt financing.
Which I had always, everybody talks about it, or behind the scenes. They don't really talk about it. They're like, oh, debt financing, uncomfortable. But I've always, even when I was a kid, I was like, debt financing doesn't seem to make sense all the time.
It doesn't make sense for people. It makes sense for businesses. And this is one of the things that we teach in our accelerator, how to build a capital stack, right? So how do you build the property investment, the actual operating expense investment, and what do you need as a debt facility to be able to draw down like a line of credit, right? So you're right, in person to person, don't get a credit card, that's bad.
It doesn't make sense to fund but this is what they tell you, you have to bootstrap, you have to do it. So then so many go into debt financing and find themselves in unfortunate situations. But they go into debt financing
with bad people.
Exactly.
Right? They go into bad people who are charging them 29%.
Predatory,
right?
And it's designed to be this way.
It is.
Because we're always asking, I think in this world, we're asking for permission. What I love about what you're creating is it's truly revolutionary.
Yes.
You're creating the landscape.
Yes.
That's very Tejana of you.
Thank you.
Yes. I mean, I think this is another interesting point of cultural intersection, is this definition of what it is to be Tejana, what it is to be a woman. Often, like, we're seen as, soft and maybe a little feisty, but maternal, right? And this maternal thing is conflated with this idea of passiveness. But when we look at the history of Tejanas, a lot of us are descended directly from soldaderas who fought in revolutionary wars not that long ago. Like the Mexican Revolutionary War was not that long ago, and many of these women are still fighting today. Especially when we're looking at issues, across the border. Because what we're finding is California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, there were all different kinds of republics, but originally made up of a lot of indigenous tribes.
That's right.
Who have now been made alien in their own land. This is a really interesting space to innovate when it comes to cannabis and empower that kind of decentralized capital fundraising, and that kind of decentralized, it's a decentralized capitalistic system. I don't know, what would you call that?
Revolution.
Or social capitalism.
I call it revolution. I really do.
True revolution.
True revolution.
Because it's really empowered by the people.
It is. Right now, we're hoping it stays that way. I think it will, because it's really going to be hard to corral the blockchain, although they're going to try, right?
Yes.
But
I think they're not savvy to that yet.
They're not yet.
They're still working on legalization right now.
It's so true. But I'll tell you, I think that you really hit on something when you're talking about the people we come from, right? So my people come from the Perapuche tribe, and they live on the sides of mountains. Like, you have to go down walking, and they live in very difficult situations. That is 3 generations before me. So my great-grandmother comes from that tribe. And from my dad on my grandfather's side, and she lived in those rocks right before she moved into Mexico City, right? And so I'm not that. When you say we're not that far removed, we really are not that far removed. And I think about myself sitting here with me, my jewelry and my necklace and
technology, man,
right? And my great grandmother. I recall this I'd get sick, and then when I was a kid, and I wouldn't get better. And I remember driving in the middle of the night. I was really sick, and my mother was driving, and we were going to Nuevo Laredo because she had moved to Nuevo Laredo. And I remember her taking me over the border and putting me in this house, and I got put on an altar. It wasn't really an altar, but it felt like an altar. And my grandmother was rubbing me. And it was, and also with cannabis or marijuana at that time. I didn't know it, but I remember the smell.
I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a conversation that it's nuanced, because there's a lot of fear around the word marijuana.
Yes.
For me, it's a sacred word.
I agree.
And I'm a little bit afraid of Latinos being washed out, because I understand that Anslinger used it to villainize us. There's another word that they use to villainize us, and it's Mexican, like the way that they use the word Mexican or the descendancy of this heritage is as if it's a slur,
right.
often. And so for me, it's almost like I want to reclaim it because it was a word that belonged to us, that was used against us, but never should have been.
Ever.
But I kind of understand why people are hesitant to use it when it's not their own. And that I can respect.
Yeah.
The making rules, though, for Latin people on Latin issues, I have some qualms with. But I think it's really cool to come to the table with everyone and have the conversation, right?
Yeah.
What kind of interesting conversations have you had in the field of cannabis, like as you've explored what's possible for the future?
I think one of the most interesting conversation, I just spoke in Costa Rica, who just became legalized for them, and they're starting to try to figure out their whole idea. And I think one of the things that's been really exciting to me is to understand that you're going to see a lot more Latin countries like come on board and come online faster than the US, Mexico, right? Let's think about it. But one of the things I try to tell them is, like, for instance, for Costa Rica, 38% of all of their imports come here. They export to the US. And I'm saying, look at the US and find me a national brand that speaks to Latinos and Latinas and Latinx. I said, yet we're 1 in 5 people in the US. We have a $1.4 trillion buying power. How is there not a brand for Latinx people? How is there not that brand anywhere that's national? You might have a brand that's in this town or that state, but national. And what I'm telling people, especially in the Latin countries, is start to develop your brand here. You don't have to have fields here. You can actually just manufacture here, because the thing that's different is that there's not an authentic voice. You cannot get an authentic voice from the larger companies. They are not being run by Latino people or even Black people.
Yeah, I think people are forgetting that about,
And so brands are going to be super important. And so brands do not require that you own a cultivation. They don't require that you own manufacturing. What they require is that you have relationship with cultivators, relationships, and those are really important.
There's a value that is, I think people are starting to really catch on to when it comes to intellectual property and ideas being you can monetize your ideas.
Yeah.
And your
the pandemic did that for us, didn't it?
Yes. And thank God, because I think for the longest time people were just being robbed of them, or having their identities hijacked in a way.
Yeah.
For this shell that really doesn't have any meaning.
Yeah.
When it comes to your company, how do you bring meaning into the work that you're doing?
I think that we look backwards to look forwards. I think we look at the medicine that was already ours and how we can reclaim that medicine. I think that we're 88% BIPOC women in my executive team, so we have authentic voice. I think that that's very, very clear. Like, to have authentic voice is very, very important. And I think that the thing for both the DAO and for my company, and the DAO is more community minded, right? It's not my company, although we brought it up together. I think what I'm hoping for with the DAO is that much of how I created a community within our ecosystem, that the DAO will also create a community that will be able to help people that need founding capital, right? Because here's the thing, this is the secret. A lot of times I hear VCs say, well, I gave this person of color, whatever color, the money, and then they just lost it. And I'm like, you just gave these white boys like $50 million and they lost all of it and bought a house in the Hollywood Hills.
And they do it all the time.
Right.
And it's no big deal.
Right. And here's the thing, it's always a big deal if it's a person of color.
I know.
Right? We have a different standard that we have to, but the reason, it's not because they're not doing it well, is that they need to have the understanding about how to leverage their capital. The very first time I had a company, I've had 2 restaurants. My grandmother had a restaurant, and I very much looked at the restaurant like my grandma did, where we budgeted. You have $100 today, you need to buy frijoles, you need to buy rice, you need to do this, and you budget, right? And then that's how you do it. That's how people who are doing small enterprise do it. But when you get to a bigger, and cannabis is a big, even if you're a small founder,
you have to think big, because it grows so rapidly.
It's so rapidly.
You have to, I've noticed that is one space where a lot of legacy operators, or maybe usually it's not the legacy operators.
Yeah.
It's the legacy operators who made the jump to legal.
Yeah.
And now they're seeing that hanging on right now. It's really hard because it's moving at warp speed and it's growing so fast and so much other money is flooding into it. How do you stay on top of your game while also maintaining that sense of balance and connection to community? Because I know how easy it is to slip into that rabbit hole where you're leading and you're charging and you're moving forward. You know, you can be we can all have that little bit of Pancho Villa in us.
Yes.
But then maybe we're a little too much sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, how do you keep it balanced and stay connected?
I think I keep it balanced because I hire really good people. I hire really good people to be part of the team. And we're a team. And I think that that's something that's very different than you see in big corporates, is that a lot of times there's the CEO, there's the COO, and we have that in our company, but everybody is respected at the same level. Everybody's idea is respected at the same level. And so if you hire really good people, you're not Don Quixote, you're not Pancho Villa, you're literally all of you. Every single person is a superstar. That's what I say. You can talk to anybody on my staff, whether it's Frederica, whether it's Melanie, whether it's Dante, whether it's Anthony, they are all brilliant. And I'm not trying to make them less brilliant because my ego requires it.
That's one of those issues that I feel corporate could learn, like cannabis could learn before we get started. Yeah. But corporate could learn from cannabis. And I think cannabis can be a real innovator for doing things differently. Yeah. If the pandemic empowered anything, I hope it would be that we can look at new ways to look at work and creation. Especially with tech automating so much, we do need to come to a new understanding or a new realization of our relationship with it.
And also, I wanted to just to piggyback off that.
Go for it.
I wanted to say the thing that we have to be very mindful of now is that there's respect for people's work, right? That you don't do something and I'm like, oh, I like what you're doing. And I do the same thing, but I'm going to do it as me, as if you never existed. So that I might be a white creator, so I'm going to have a larger following and I'm not going to give you the shine.
That happens a lot.
All the time. I cannot tell you how much stuff of ours has been bit. I cannot even tell you. And I don't mind that. I want everybody to feel this excitement. I want everybody to do it, but give respect. You know what
exactly. I'm saying? I think that's the difference between appreciation and appropriation.
There you go.
You know, that is what sticks out to me when you were talking about the DAO and you were talking about the communities that come around to support retail operations and how they can invest. It really got me thinking, especially because you're at Tejana, you're from Austin, but you live in LA. Gentrification is a real word. And we're seeing it happen in rapid time here in Austin.
Like literally double time. I was just telling my COO, I was like, when we moved here, houses were like $350. I said, now they're going, the same house.
Same $350 house 10 years ago is now like 1.5 mil.
Yes.
It's really pushing out the collective, and the East Side is completely, I was joking when I first got back because I moved back from New York 3 years ago. And I was like, the East Side used to be a brown bag and a blunt.
Yep.
Now it's, you know, there's IPAs, it's like Pleasantville for me over there.
I'm like, when are they going to put up the Lululemon? That's what I want to know.
That's what's happening.
Right.
And it's really interesting because it's Austin, you know, so there's a lot of culture here to preserve. And the East Side, for those who aren't aware, the East Side was where we were redlined. So that's where Black and brown communities, for the most part, were allowed to be, primarily, especially the Black community. And so it's so interesting to see that space gentrified. The way that I'm bringing this all up because, one, context, and everybody should just know this is part of our history. Acknowledging it is important. We have to be a little shame resilient around our acknowledgement of things that were inequitable if we're going to change them. It's not just that, but the way that you've designed the People's DAO, if it's the community investing, and then also the community at large in the digital world. Yeah. So it really could be anyone who believes in you.
Yeah. But also deciding who gets invested in.
Deciding, but then if those communities are invested, they're also profiting off of their own consumption, which means it feeds the area, so we don't have to worry. A lot of people say when gentrification happens, it's for their own good, to make the neighborhood better. I think what they would realize if we had access to the same capital that other people have, they would see that our neighborhoods would be our own. And it wouldn't be as much of an issue, especially when we look at policing. So the idea that the DAO can actually reverse engineer some of this, or at least stop some of it in the tracks, Not because we don't want other people to come here. I'm not about that. I love having all, this is Austin.
Right.
Everybody's welcome.
Keep it weird.
We keep it real weird over here. But it's that if you're coming, that you're joining the culture that's here, that you're blending together with us, that we're all able to rise up together.
Then join it, don't dictate it.
Exactly. Right? Because I want to know who you are, where you're from, what your story is, like what your flavor, what's your terpene profile? And I want you to know what my terpene profile is. And I want everybody to be able to have that communal experience of individuality. Yeah. That's a really impressive concept that the DAO supports by turning the model upside down when it comes to consumption and the community actually profiting. Yeah. That's madness, but brilliant madness.
Right? But think about this. Think about if I am invested in this dispensary, manufacturing, cultivation, and I'm going to go out and I have friends coming in from Atlanta. We're going to go and, pick up some stuff for the weekend. Am I going to go to the dispensary I invested in, or I'm going to go to a dispensary I did? Actually, yes, you're doing that. And that is really a collective way of building wealth, generational wealth.
And that's how you get people to stop looking at capitalism as if like we have this scarce little piece of the pie and how we can start sharing more. Yeah. Seeing that there is more opportunity. Like you said, there's room for all of us at the table. There's not even a table. It's just like infinite elevation, right?
It's true. And the thing about it is that it doesn't take away from the larger companies. This is the thing I think that is very much a misunderstanding, is that just because people at this level are succeeding doesn't mean the people that have all the money in the world are not succeeding.
They can still thrive. We can all do this together.
And the way that you do that is that you really invest as a company, as a large company, into these smaller companies, supporting them, doing whatever you need to make sure that they're doing well. And this is the idea for culture and community. It's if you're doing well, I'm doing well.
Yeah.
If you're doing well, I'm doing well. If we're all doing well,
everybody's
doing well. Thank you.
And now let's all smoke.
And cannabis is very much aligned with that. It's one of those community products. It's one of those community medicines that we should be looking at. I'm not kumbaya. We don't need to know about profitability. Cannabis is profitable. Right? It's not as profitable as it can be.
Connector.
Yeah, but it's not as profitable as it can be because it's still federally, illegal. But once it becomes federally legal, the sky's the limit.
And I mean, I know we're wrapping up here, but I think for another conversation in the future, because I see many in our future, that whole conversation on decrim before legalization.
Yeah.
We need to, it would be really easy to deschedule. Really easy. So
it would be easy.
Well, I guess, as we kind of bring the conversation to a close, what is your idea? What is your really big dream? Really from the root of your heart as a Tejana in Texas with this global influence, doing this work that you're doing to decentralize the control and bring power back to the people. What's your vision for the next year in cannabis for yourself?
My vision for the next year is that we see upwards of 30% of all cannabis companies being owned by women, Black and brown people, and that the DAO will help make that a reality because they will have access to capital.
Speak it, and so shall it be. All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Christine, for joining me. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you, Sean.
Next time we're singing our favorite Selena songs. You got the bangs. You're working on
I'm just saying.
She's got it. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining us for this intimate conversation with Christine De la Rosa of the People's Ecosystem and the People's DAO. I'm Sean Salvaje. This is Highly Informed. Stay elevated.